Hello, everybody. It's 11 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. As people join, I'll just be doing a little intro. So if people are coming in, that's great. That's okay. Today, we're really focusing in on how to track and adjust. We're in our admin summer webinar series where we're talking about how to set your schools up for success using Edcite schools. Yesterday, we talked about, really investing your team and making sure that you are giving them the professional development that they need in order to use Edcite schools to the maximum ability. Today, we'll be talking about how to track, where to find information in Edcite and data in Edcite, and how to track and adjust purposefully using that data. And then tomorrow, we'll talk about how to celebrate, right? We often talk about how to step in when data needs support, but tomorrow we'll also be focusing on how to celebrate when students and teachers and staff are doing well. Quick introduction to me. If you were here yesterday, apologies for the repetitiveness here, but I used to be an ELA teacher and then I was an instructional coach. I moved up to principal, and as a principal had Edcite on my campus. So I can speak a lot to how Edcite helped us drive towards our A campus goal, which we ultimately reached 2 out of the 2 years I was principal and we were eligible for that distinction or for that letter grade. And I really attribute a lot of that to Edcite. So today, I'll be talking you through some of the practical components of making sure the data comes alive outside of Edcite, and making sure your team is using everything that they can find in Edcite to track and adjust to make sure students are growing. I've been on the Edcite team for a couple of years, and I'm just really excited to continue to share with other people how Edcite can help them. Quick little story here that I just wanted to make sure that I share, because I think that this information can feel kind of dry. Like we're just talking about data, right? But I wanted to talk about my first year as an instructional coach and the ELA team that I was supporting. We had 2 big benchmarks at my district. And between the first and second benchmark, I was extremely tedious about tracking the data. I always had my data in on time. I always had all the nitty-gritty things I was supposed to have tracked in the tracker, ready to go by the time it was due. And my partner, who was, coaching a lot of the math teachers, didn't always do that. So I felt like, oh, I was doing everything I needed to. Everything was great. And then the second benchmark comes around, and my team had actually decreased while her team had increased in student achievement. When in talking with my coach, what I realized was she actually explicitly had to tell me, right, that it's not the data that matters, it's what you do with the data that matters. And so while I was tracking very carefully and everything looked perfect in my tracker, she was out doing the things with the teachers and supporting and adjusting and making moves to help kids. And that's why her data grew and mine didn't. So the focus here is on tracking, but we're really focusing on how to make sure that we're having discussions around what we're tracking and we're adjusting so that students and staff are continuing to learn and grow. Which leads us right to our objectives. So by the end of this session, you will be able to name the steps used to plan for year-long tracking. It'll be really important that you're able to say, okay, in order to be set up for success, here are the steps I need to follow to be ready for that beginning of year and then throughout the year. You'll also be able to name how Edcite Schools reports will drive that tracking, right? We're going to be going into Edcite to get the data, so we want to make sure we can name for our teams what that looks like. And then just a quick plug, we're also going to be able to access our admin success guide. It's updated this year, so I want to make sure everyone has the most up-to-date information. This is what it looks like, and I'm adding the link to the chat. If you're watching a recording, we'll also have this link ready for everyone, because this is really your one-stop shop for everything that you need to know about Edcite schools as an administrator. We've restructured it. It's a bit more concise, so we're hoping that that's really helpful to you as you navigate through Edcite at the beginning of this school year. All right, so our goal here when we're talking about driving year-long tracking and what Edcite does with data, one of our goals is to make sure that we are giving you the data you need to track progress towards your goals and adjust for meaningful growth and mastery. So we really, give you that data, and today we'll be talking a little bit about what you can do with your teams to adjust for growth and mastery. So across the top of your screen, you'll see the 4 steps that we're recommending at this beginning of year time in this time frame. So the first thing you need to do is determine your academic goals. So when we're thinking about academic goals, Edcite has so many options. We have schools that use Edcite for AP art portfolios. We have schools that are using Edcite for students to submit reflections on how they've done and open response questions. There are so many different ways that students can, take a picture of their work and upload it with their assignment. So there's so many different goals here that you can use Edcite to track towards, some more formative and some more summative. Today, and for the purpose of this training, I will be talking a lot about alignment to state exams, because we know that that's something that we do very well at Edcite, but I just want to name that we also do a lot of other things very well. But our focus for today, as I'm talking about data, for my example, will kind of lean towards end of year state testing. But you could determine different academic goals that you want to track towards. So first, I need to figure out what it is that I'm tracking towards. On the screen, you see an example of a state of Texas academic report card for a school. And so I've really just gone in and I've determined that, for tracking purposes, for earning an A as an A campus, I really need to be looking at the percent of students that are at approaches, meets, and masters on their STAR aligned assessments throughout the year. So those are the academic goals that I'm going to be focusing on for this example. Then I need to think about what are all the metrics that go into this goal, right? Like I need to go into Edcite and find this data. So first, let me list the metrics I need to be able to find. So of course, I would need the percent of students that approaches, meets, and masters. And that's just what the performance bands in Texas are called. They might be different in your state, but just being able to find student performance by performance band. And then in Texas, they call it the overall student achievement score, but it's just the average of the approaches, meets, and masters. So I need to be able to find that for all students. And then in this report card, I don't know if you can see, it's a little small. It also looks at subpopulations. So it looks at special education students, EL students, African American students, white students, Hispanic students. So I also need that information based off of subpopulations. So I determined the goal that I want to track towards, and then I listed all the metrics that I will need to be able to go into Edcite and find in order to know if I'm on track to meet this goal. Step 3 is the big one. So here's where we determine each metric and where it's found in Edcite, right? So I listed all those things. Now, where do I go? Quick plug for our YouTube channel. If you're not sure, we do have a single assessment report overview in Edcite. It's like a 3-minute video. It will tell you everything you need to know, big picture, about our single assessment reports. And then we also have help guides for all of these things as well. So if you're not sure, that's a great place to start. But within my example, if I'm looking at the student achievement score, I need to know the percent of students in each performance band. Then I'm going to head over to the dynamic report. And so you can see in this example that I'm in the dynamic report and I'm able to see the percentage and the count of students that are within each performance band. Right now I have this running by teacher, so I'm able to see each teacher and how many or what percentage of students they have falling within each performance band on a test. But if you'll remember, I also needed that information by subpop. So I kind of highlighted here with this arrow that in our filters, as long as you have student groups set up, you can also filter that data to look at student group data. So within one report, I can get the overall, I can get by teacher, by school, by class, and then I can also look at specific groups of students. So that's where I'd be going for this example. And again, I highly recommend you check out our YouTube channel for reports or our knowledge base for help guides to look at which reports should you be looking at in order to pull the data. So once I know where I'm pulling the data within Edcite, I really need to think about what does my tracker look like? And so here's just a quick example where on the right-hand side, you can see that we're tracking for each unit the overall approaches, meets, and masters. So that was the metric that I needed. I'm just tracking it for all students on the unit exams. On the left-hand side, you can see that I'm also tracking some of the sub-pops. So at the school where I used to be a principal, we had a pretty large special education population and a pretty large EL population. So we were also tracking that very closely after each benchmark. So I just kind of wanted to name, I'm tracking overall for the unit tests, and then I'm really digging into sub-pop performance after bigger benchmarks. Um, and let's talk about why, right? You want to think about when you're creating your tracker, previous data and your own population, right? So if you had a goal or a piece of data that was unexpectedly low last year, then that's probably something you want on your tracker because you want to keep your eyes on it this year. You also want to think about your team capacity. So for example, here, for unit exams, I would have my instructional coaches just track after each unit exam overall performance. Because I knew that to ask them to do every single sub-pop for every single unit exam, 6th through 8th grade, all 4 subjects, was probably going to kill them, right? So we kept it a little bit more simple for the unit exams. And then on the bigger tests, those benchmark exams, we would go in and we would look at the sub-pop and really were expected to flesh that data out more after bigger tests. And that was what my team could handle. If you have a bigger team or a smaller team, you might need to adjust your tracker accordingly. And then the last thing to think about, along with previous data, team capacity, is how are your goals weighted, right? What goals matter the most to you and your vision for your campus? What goals matter the most to your student population? And potentially maybe even how are goals weighted at the state level? So you want to align your tracker to those things. I have my eye on the chat, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in there. Okay, so we've gone through the 4 steps. So we figured out what our goal was. We named the metrics we needed to track those goals. We figured out where to find them in Edcite. And if we weren't sure, we could just email support@edcite.com, which I'll show you at the end, or we could use the YouTube channel. And then we created our tracker. We were thinking about, what's the capacity of our team and what's actually going to get done. So now let's talk about investing our team really quickly and thinking about who's going to track what, right? As a principal, as a superintendent, as a district leader, you might not be able to track everything, but you might have coaches, you might have support staff that's able to own certain goals and track certain things. So feel free to delegate. Who's going to track what? Then you need to think about how often will you be tracking. So, our expectation was after unit exams and benchmarks, but maybe, every Friday your team tracks or every Tuesday your team tracks. It's important to have that cadence so that it's, kind of expected and people know when to plan for time to track. And then number 3 is really important as well, right? When are you going to discuss what you've tracked? You want to make sure that no one on your team is like I was my first year as an instructional coach and just tracking away and it looks beautiful, but nothing's happening, right? You want to talk about what's the data in Edcite? What are we seeing in these reports? Where are the hotspots? Who needs help? What can we do? So making sure that you have time, protected time to make sure that you're discussing what you've tracked, discussing what you're finding in Edcite is really going to be a huge game changer. And then last but not least, when you're rolling this out to your team, you really want to think about why is this tracking important and lead and probably also finish with that. Your team is going to be more invested when they understand why this tracking is important. And that answer will be different for every campus, for every team. But I really want to, lift that question up as something that's really important for you to consider when you're rolling out tracking with your team. All right, so now let's talk about planning to adjust, right? We've gone through the 4 steps. We know that now we have our tracker, we've invested our team in our tracker, we're starting to track. But if we don't plan for adjustments, then in the middle of the year when we're exhausted and things are rolling, we're just gonna keep going because it's hard to adjust when you're exhausted and systems aren't in place for it. But if you plan for it at the beginning of the year and you already know how you're going to adjust, then it becomes so much easier because you already know what you're going to do. So let's look at this. I think one thing that you can do that's really helpful is pre-planning data cutoffs. So you can see the dynamic report we looked at earlier. You can see that one teacher has 100% of students in the critical band, right? It's a small number of students, but let's say it's not. And, that's really concerning data. What is the cutoff? When am I going to offer this teacher more support? When am I going to make a more hands-on change? And when am I going to celebrate teachers? So having a plan for that and knowing, maybe it's a certain number of assessments below goal, you're going to step in and offer more support. Maybe it's a certain number below goal. You're going to step in and you're going to make a more hands-on change with a teacher. But just kind of thinking about what are the numbers where we're going to kind of raise those red flags and hop in for support and hop in for more hands-on changes when teachers or students are struggling. So I think that's really important, because if you don't have those cut scores in mind and the data is just kind of going down and down and down, and you haven't said at this point, we're going to make a change, then change might not happen, and then we're not adjusting, right? Because again, Edcite has so much beautiful data in it, but if you're not adjusting to that data and responding to that data, then it's not as helpful. And then I'm kind of mentioning interventions, right? Let's offer more support. Let's do a more hands-on change. But it's really helpful to kind of pre-plan those. If you think of it as like a bank of options to choose from, you want to think about your team, the capacity on your team, and what are those interventions. I put some examples here of things I've seen. I'm sure you all have great ideas as well. But you might offer extra coaching. You might create tutorial groups of students. We have options in our reports to create student groups. And so you can create those student groups right in Edcite and track along how those tutorial groups are doing. You might offer co-teacher support. You might do extra or side-by-side planning with a teacher. You might have the content leader hop in and do some support, right? The options here, this is a limited list. There's so much that you can do. But the idea here is that you've pre-planned what the options are that your campus has capacity for. So when you do get to that data cutoff and that person or that group of students or, what have you, that grade level sometimes is struggling enough, okay, we've hit that point where they need more support. Here are our options. Here's our customized list of support that we're offering to teachers and to students. So I think when those things are pre-planned, I'm just going to go back real quick. When those things are pre-planned and you're seeing in your tracker, you can see, for example, here, ELA is declining, right? 2 tests in a row, the data has gone down, and math is actually going up. So maybe here's where we would, have a pre-planned celebration for math, which we'll talk about more tomorrow. But for ELA, maybe this is one of those points where we have a data cutoff and we're a little bit more concerned. So we're going to go and we're going to head right into our bank of options. And we're going to say, you know what, this teacher is going to benefit from some side-by-side planning with their coach and offer that support, because we've seen in our tracker where the student data is trending. So yeah, grab that data from Edcite, put it into your tracker so that you're seeing it overall, and then have those data cuts that you're sure where, this is where I need to make an adjustment, and then have your adjustments pre-planned. Have that bank ready to go. Okay, so we moved through a lot, right? But we can find the admin success guide, the new and updated version. We're able to name the steps for creating and rolling out a tracker. And then we've seen just some tips and tricks and ways that we can adjust once our tracker is in practice, and we have operating mechanisms to make sure we're discussing that tracker. We can adjust to student need and teacher need in the moment. So I'll, go ahead and pause here for any questions. You can put them in the chat if you have questions. And I also just wanted to name that you can always email support@edcite.com. We have great resources on YouTube and on our knowledge base. But if you're unsure, you have a goal and you're unsure where to find the data in Edcite to track that goal, just email us and our team can give you some insight on where that data would be most easily found and most aligned to your goal. So thank you guys for everything that you're doing for your students. And I'll pause here if there are any questions.